Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest of our FrenchEntrée webinars. My name is Zoe Smith. I'm digital editor of FrenchEntrée, and in today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on buying property and moving to France for Americans. I'm joined today by a panel of 3 experts from our partners at Leggett International Real Estate, Chase Buchanan USA, and Moneycorp, and I'll introduce you to all of them in just a moment. For those of you that aren't familiar with FrenchEntrée, we are part of the France Media Group, who are specialist publishers covering all aspects of French life and culture, from travel to gastronomy to buying property. FrenchEntrée itself has been a leading resource for French property buyers for 20 years now. Not only do we help buyers to find their dream properties in France, we also help and advise with every aspect of the property buying and moving to France journey. Now, if you are looking to buy a property in France, you may also be interested in our French Property News magazine, which you can subscribe to over on the FrenchEntrée website. And whilst you're there, be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter to stay up to date with all the latest news on France and the French property market. And you can also buy our full range of magazines, gift cards, and our newly released 2024 France calendar at francemedia.shop. Finally, while I imagine most of you attending today are based in the US, if you do happen to be in the UK in January next year, make sure to sign up for our French property exhibition. This is a really great opportunity to come and meet us all in person, browse thousands of French properties, and attend seminars from a wide range of industry leaders and experts. Some of today's panelists will be there too, and we'll also have experts covering subjects from buying property, tax, legal and mortgages, to visas, healthcare, currency exchange, and much more. Entry is free, and you can register for tickets on FrenchEntrée.com or FrenchPropertyExhibition.com. So let's jump into today's Americans in France webinar. We're aiming for a runtime of around 1 hour today, and each of our speakers are going to give a short presentation, after which I'll be putting some of your questions to them. We'll also conduct a couple of polls throughout if we have time, and we will also have some extra time at the end for more questions, so do make sure that you stick around until the end of the webinar. You can put your questions in the Q&A box on your screen at any time throughout. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel of experts, and a huge thank you to all of them for kindly giving up their time to join us this morning. If I could ask you to all please turn on your cameras now. There they are. Okay, so first up today will be Brad Turner from French estate agents, Leggett International Real Estate, who's going to be focusing on the French property market and giving some advice for Americans looking to buy in France. Next, we have Alex Ingram, co-founder and president of Chase Buchanan USA, who are global financial advisors. And he's going to be talking us through some of the key considerations for tax and wealth management for US citizens purchasing French property or moving to France. And last but definitely not least, we have Kelly Cutchin from currency exchange specialist Moneycorp, who will be advising on how to secure the best currency exchange rate and why this is so important for French property buyers. Right, that's more than enough from me. So let's go straight over to our first speaker, which is Brad Turner from Leggett International Real Estate. Over to you, Brad.
Thanks, Zoe. Let me set up the presentation here, if you just give me 1 second. It's great having everybody here. I really appreciate you guys coming out, and hopefully we're all set. So welcome. And let me just start by saying hello. Thank you for coming out. So I work in Bordeaux, Leggett Real Estate. We are an international real estate agency based throughout France with agents throughout, and we have brick and mortar agencies in some of the bigger cities as well. One of the things that's really important to understand is that we are currently the leading real estate agency in France dealing with international sales. And it's important also to understand that we have bilingual agents throughout France, so we're more than comfortable handling any type of transaction, both in French and in English, and are very good at explaining the situation, especially with our experience. As I mentioned before, we are pretty much throughout France, and we have currently over 8,000 properties for sale on our site. Americans were the 4th biggest group of buyers after the French, the British, and the Dutch. And so with the strength of the dollar currently, we're seeing that number increase as well. Currently, in the market, what we're finding is that there's been an increase throughout the last 10 years in larger markets such as Paris, Bordeaux, and Nice, in the major metropolitan areas, as you can imagine. And what was interesting was that in those larger cities, we were seeing a lot of the French owners moving out of the cities into the country just simply because they wanted to have more outdoor space during the COVID period. So at that point, they were buying up a lot of the properties that were sitting on the market for longer than average in the countryside. And that's important to understand as well. So there was a general drop in the overall amount of purchases throughout France over the last 12 months. And that is mostly due to the interest rates going up and also the difficulty in some cases with buyers being able to get mortgages. So nationally, the prices did hold up because there was low stock, but we're starting to see a bit of a downturn in the actual property prices, which means it's actually a buyer's market. And that's also really important. And I had mentioned before, like I said before, there's a bunch of different reasons which are included on this slide that you can see. So it's a good time to be here in France to buy property. And as I mentioned before, the buyers are the ones that are sort of dictating the market, whereas before it was really the sellers. So as I mentioned, I live in Bordeaux, which is in the southwest of France, just about 45 minutes to an hour from the Atlantic coast. We live about 2.5 hours from the mountains, and the rapid train service to Paris is 2 hours. So it's quite easy to get actually up to the capital, which makes Bordeaux a fabulous place to live. Here in Bordeaux, we do, as I mentioned before, have our own agency, which is located right next to the City Hall in Bordeaux. And our agents actually offer a bespoke home finder service. So one of the things that we'll do is if you get in touch with us, we actually will start working in advance while you're still back in the US on trying to source properties, both within our agency and with partner agencies as well, similar to what you would find with the multiple listing service in the United States. And this works quite well because it gives us an opportunity to actually set up a sort of curated tour of properties upon your arrival. Excuse me. For those of you who don't know Bordeaux, it's a fabulous place to live. I'm obviously biased because I've been here for over 5 years now, but it offers quite a bit, as you can see. There's vineyards, beautiful landscape, lots of culture, museums, great restaurants, music, and easy access to the coast as well. And as I mentioned before, we're just north of the mountains separating Spain and France, so skiing isn't too far away as well. In and around Bordeaux, there's a huge amount of stock that's available. And so I thought I'd give you guys an idea, sort of a smattering of what we do have. So the first property, as you can see, is a beach property, very modern. The second property is located east of us towards Saint-Emilion. And the other property that you see is actually located not too far away from us, about 30 to 45 minutes, in an area that's actually rolling hills with lots of different vineyards. This is just an example of a freestanding property that you could be looking to purchase, but we also offer apartments and different size properties as well with all different price points. And it's important to understand that Leggett isn't just prestige. We actually focus on character properties in and around France, in the countryside as well as in the city. So that's a really nice thing to know as well. And as you can imagine, you've got your lion's share of different types of properties depending on where you're looking. And the price points are also going to vary depending on demand. As I mentioned, we're only about 2 hours from Paris via TGV, which is the fast rail line. And as you know, in 2024, Paris is going to be hosting the Olympics. And so there'll be quite a few people coming to visit. So it's really exciting for the country right now. And everybody's got this buzz about the whole process. And Paris itself, as you can imagine, has strong investment potential. Although it's very expensive, we're really not seeing the downturn in the market as we are in other different areas around the countryside. But there is a slight sort of calming of the real estate market in Paris, but it's still remained a strong investment potential. And there are a lot of expats living there. And as you know, Paris is the capital, and it's absolutely fabulous, especially with the buzz about Emily in Paris, the series on TV that everybody's so excited about. These are a few properties that you'll be able to find on our website. And if you have a chance, take a look. We also have quite a few properties available throughout France. Some of these properties are located all the way to the east in the Alps. We have properties in the south down towards the Provence area, as well as the Côte d'Azur. And there's properties that are selling for under 40,000 euros, believe it or not, that are ready for renovation. And so if you're a fixer-upper type person and you're looking to actually have a project, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. A lot of second residences as well that are opportunities for people. And we even sell off-plan properties, which means that you purchase and then pay as they're being developed. And these are just some examples that you'll be able to see on our website. And as I mentioned before, it runs the gamut from 36,000 euros for a fixer-upper to 8 million euros for a very spacious chalet right on the ski slopes. So you see that there's quite a variety of properties that Leggett offers throughout the country. One of the things that's really important about what we offer as an agency and as agents ourselves is to be able to take people through the process of actually purchasing property here in France. And it's important because it's different than it is in the United States or other countries. But the greatest thing about being here is that the market is so regulated, it's extraordinarily safe. And so what you would consider a title search in the United States, here in France is ironclad. So you know there won't be anybody actually laying claim to a property 3-4 years down the road. That's all been taken care of before you even sign the actual purchase agreement. Because everything's gone technologically advanced now, and during COVID, people weren't actually able to meet together. Electronic signatures have made things quite easy. So in fact, it's possible to purchase a property from a distance once you come and visit it. I would never suggest anyone purchase a property sight unseen. Although we've seen that happen, especially during COVID, it's certainly a better thing to get here and actually visit the property now that you're able to get into France and the restrictions have been lifted. When you're looking at a real estate listing, the estate agency fees are included in the listing price. So it's really important to keep that in mind. But there is an extra 7 to 8% cost in the purchase price of a property to cover the equivalent of a real estate fee, attorney fee, and government taxes. So if you're looking at a 500,000 euro property, just to make the math simple, anticipate spending an extra 35,000 euros to cover those costs. So with the dollar being strong against the euro, I think it's really important to consider trying to purchase currency here in euros in advance if the actual exchange rate is going to be beneficial to you, because it could save you quite a bit of money in the long term. To buy a property in France, once you've made an offer, if it's a cash purchase, for example, and you're offering asking price, that's considered a perfect sale as long as you have proof of funds and the seller is required to accept your offer. So that's really important to understand. Once you've made that offer, you then go to a pre-purchase agreement, which usually takes about 3 weeks to 4 weeks to actually get the paperwork written up by the notaire, who is the real estate attorney. And then there's about a 2 to 3 month waiting period where the city hall actually has the right of eminent domain on a purchase. But I've never seen this happen. I've heard a very rare story about it, but otherwise you can anticipate this isn't going to happen. And if it does, it's less than 1%, if not even less than that. So it's important to understand that. And by the time you've actually made the purchase, you're looking at about a 4-month delay minimum. One of the things that's really important to think about is if you're considering coming to France and you're looking to get a visa, if you're going to be spending less than the sort of requisite amount of time that you're allowed to spend on a tourist visa, those visas need to be obtained with applications from the United States. Now, I'm not a specialist in this field, so I'm not going to give any advice specifically on this, but definitely consider talking to somebody who does actually work in the field, because there are third-party companies that help with visa applications. Otherwise, there's a company called VFS Global, which is actually suggested and recommended by the consulates in your different cities. And there are 9 centers in the US apparently that can do this for you. Okay, so just make sure you're aware of that, because I don't think at this point it's possible to obtain a visa while you're actually in France. Briefly about me, because obviously it's important to understand why I came here. So I moved to France in 2018. I lived in the Boston area for about 10 years. I was actually practicing as a surgeon, believe it or not. And I decided I wanted a career change. I was familiar with France. It's very close to my heart. My wife is actually a French national. And this area has been just very, very amazing for me because of its proximity, as I mentioned, to the beach. So we have an agency, as you can see in the bottom. That's my partner with whom I work. He's actually from the United Kingdom. And we're really proud to have this agency open now for a little under 2 months. It's right next to City Hall. So if you're in the area, please stop by for a coffee. I made a great group of friends since I moved here. As you can see, we play beach volleyball all year round, rain or shine. And we take advantage of the surrounding areas and what it has to offer and all the spoils, which includes wine tasting. So this is a picture of me and my family wine tasting in one of the cellar rooms as well. Tips for buying property and living in France. Location is everything. I think personally, if you're looking to make an investment, it's very important to buy in an area where you know there's an upward trend. But I also think that you want to be happy where you live. And there are some people that prefer to be in the countryside. That's location. If you want to be in an urban area, that's location. If you don't speak French, start. People are welcoming here. They'll try to speak English with you as best they can, and they'll be patient with you as well. But don't be afraid to ask for help. People are out there to help. So get out there, introduce yourself, join clubs, get on these forums, start joining groups on social media like Facebook, and you'll find yourself meeting a lot of different people initially virtually and then eventually in person. And that's really the best way to get involved. To contact us if you have anything that you want to find out about, here's our website. There's a QR code for future webinars if you decide to join. Here's the contact information for the VFS Global that I mentioned, and there's a visa fact sheet that we actually have on our website as well. And if you have any questions directly for Leggett, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. On my end,
Brilliant.
here are my coordinates. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you guys very much.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Lots of really good advice there for all of you looking to buy in France. We're now going to put a couple of your frequently asked questions to Brad. And remember, we are going to come back to Brad with more questions at the end. So do get your questions in. You can put them in the Q&A box at any time. Let me just bring these up. Okay, first question. Can you share some tips for negotiating with French sellers? In particular, are there any cultural nuances that Americans should be mindful of?
That's a great question, Zoe, actually. And that's a question that a lot of times we get from our international buyers. So historically, the property values that are listed on the actual advertising are not available for bidding over asking price. That does not happen here in France. So it's not possible to offer over asking like what we see in a hot market in the United States, which means that oftentimes there will be some negotiation wiggle room involved in that price. And that's really key to understand. Now, we've seen people making offers 5% below asking, and we've seen people making offers 10% below asking. The international clienteles, especially the Americans and the British and the Australians, tend to offer significantly less than what the French would offer. And one of the things culturally is they don't want to insult the seller. That's being changed because it's now becoming a buyer's market. So when it's a buyer's market, we're seeing much more aggressive negotiation. So the answer is we're not here to insult anyone by any means. And that's our job as agents to advise our buyers as to what we feel would be an appropriate offer price. And it's also our job as agents to work with our sellers to let them know that the market is slowing down and that perhaps they need to be willing to listen to an offer because things are changing and we want to make sure that everybody's happy.
Yeah, that's really good advice. All right, let's do one more question for Brad before we move on. Right, is it still possible for Americans to get a mortgage, or is it more of a cash market right now?
Another good question. So because of the way the regulations are set up in France, French banks are quite hesitant to lend money to American buyers. Part of that has to do with regulations that were put in place years ago to essentially protect the French banks from receiving money or funds or lending to people that may not necessarily be able to pay that off. So ultimately, what I found with American buyers is if you're a cash buyer, you have a lot more ability to negotiate because you have a much more solid position when it comes to making a purchase. If for some reason you're not able to purchase cash, then my recommendation would be to consider getting a home equity line of credit from whatever property you have in the United States and essentially buy using money that you've taken from equity in your other property in the United States. Finally, if that's not an option for you, there are a couple lenders, but no more than 3 or 4 that I'm aware of that will consider looking at American applications for mortgages. So it's difficult, not impossible. Even the strongest candidates for a mortgage from the United States trying to buy using a French bank or an international bank may not get their actual application accepted. So it's a case-by-case basis, and I can certainly put people in touch with the right brokerage firms to go through that process.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Right, we'll come back to Brad again at the end with more questions, so keep them coming in. We're now going to go straight over to our next speaker, which is Alex Ingram from Chase Buchanan, USA. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to share my screen and pop up my presentation. We are going to be talking about French tax considerations. So I'll try and make a heavy topic as light as I can. Just a disclaimer, I am not a tax lawyer. I am not an American or French tax lawyer. I'm an American financial planner and financial advisor. So this is just for educational purposes. Please do seek out a tax lawyer if you're going to buy property in France or move to France. I am American. I'm originally from Alaska. I grew up in the Northwest. I first moved to France in 2008, and I met my wife there, and I essentially never returned to the US. So I've had the experience of living in Provence and in the French Alps, and I can vouch for both places. They really are as incredible as they look. So just a starting note on the French tax residency. What does it mean to be French tax resident? One of the most common questions we get is, does buying a home in France make you French tax resident, even if you still intend to live in the US? The answer is no. You have to fulfill a number of residency requirements, and it can really be any of the three that I've listed there. So it can be you've gotten an immigration visa and you're spending more than 6 months of the year or 183 days in France. It can be the place where your main abode is, meaning that is really where your home is, regardless of if you travel around the world. If that is your main abode and your main home and your main residency, then you could be considered French tax resident. And then the final piece is if the center of your family or economic interests is in France and they can prove that, then you can be considered French tax resident. So what that might mean is if you have a partner and children that are, living in Paris, going to school in Paris, but you try and claim tax residency outside of France, it might not necessarily fly with the French tax authorities. They can bring you back into the net that way. But you really have to make an intentional move to be French tax resident. And I think that's the big takeaway. The question that we ask for a lot of Americans, particularly American retirees, is actually not around, what's the French tax burden? It's actually, why wouldn't you move to France? We've had clients that were just considering really buying a property in France and not living there. And it makes a lot of sense to actually move to France because France and the US might have Europe's best double taxation agreement. So when you're a resident of two different countries, when you're American, when you're a US citizen or green card holder, you are going to be liable to file US taxes regardless of whether you live in the US or not. And then when you move to France and become French tax resident, you are tax resident in two places, which means that the taxation on your income streams and your assets will be governed by this double taxation agreement. And the double taxation agreement between France and the US states that retirement income from most sources in the US is going to be taxed at US rates. So that means Social Security income, pension income, IRA and 401k distributions are all taxed at US income rates, US income tax rates, rather than French income tax rates. So that can be a really significant saving. Roth IRAs also remain tax-free in France, and that is not the case in most jurisdictions in Europe. So France has a very unique double taxation agreement and a very beneficial double taxation agreement when you consider that most of the other countries in Europe don't have the same benefits. Another piece is that if you structure your investment, your taxable investment portfolio correctly, capital gains taxes can be paid at US tax rates rather than French tax rates. So there are a lot of beneficial pieces of this double taxation agreement. And we've seen people that really weren't necessarily intending to move to France move there because they realize there wouldn't be significant financial implications for them. We often get asked if there's a wealth tax in France. So in France, the wealth tax is actually just applied to real estate assets or investments that invest in real estate assets. If you are not a French tax resident, then this just applies on any French property that you might have. If you become tax resident in France, then after 5 years, this applies to worldwide property holdings or worldwide property investments. And it's a tax that's applied once your real estate assets exceed 1.3 million euros. It's a progressive tax rate. The first band, kind of 800,000 to 1.3 million, is a 0% tax rate. And then it goes up from there. The important thing to remember is this isn't a true wealth tax in the sense that it's a tax on your entire asset base. It's really just a tax on your real estate assets. And so that kind of brings us to a point where you look at and realize that some asset bases are really actually well positioned for French tax residency. If you're not really real estate heavy, you have a lot of retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and you're American, then France can be a really beneficial tax jurisdiction for you. It's also worth remembering that all of those double taxation agreement benefits really only apply to Americans or people that have US assets. So those are kind of the benefits of France. Some of the downsides from a tax perspective, and specifically when you're talking about property, is just when it comes to estate planning. So France is a pretty rigorous estate tax jurisdiction. They have a high estate tax, and it kicks in at fairly low levels, even when you're talking about gifting to your children. One thing that's important to point out, France is a civil law jurisdiction, and that is very different from a common law jurisdiction like the US or the UK or countries that are from that legal tradition. So trusts don't work in France. They're not legally recognized. They don't perform the same function. And in fact, if you have any kind of trust and you're living in France, the reporting requirements can be quite onerous, and the penalties for reporting incorrectly are pretty high. So that's something to really be aware of. And particularly because most Americans would think first of maybe putting their property in trust just to bypass probate for their estate planning. But it's not the same concept in France. And part of being a civil law jurisdiction is that you have this concept called forced heirship that exists in France. And forced heirship is the concept that your assets have to pass down your bloodline. And they have to be proportioned equally depending on your relationship with your beneficiaries. And this is quite different, again, from the common law tradition where we might have a will where we say, hey, I'd like to give one of my children a house, but I might give my other child some cash. And what this means in terms of property is that there's a very clear line of succession where, you know, your direct descendants need to inherit your property. And that can even work to the point of if, you know, your spouse or your partner is not necessarily related to your children, then there can be issues where sometimes the inheritance can bypass an unmarried partner or spouse. So there are some issues to take into account when it comes to forced heirship. The solution there is that there is a directive called Brussels 4, which means that you can nominate in your will to use the law of your jurisdiction of origin. So for most of us, it'd be the US, to pass down your assets in a way that's recognized by US law. So it's really important to have your will be extremely clear and to outline where you want your assets to go to when you're living in France. And we would definitely recommend an estate planning lawyer. The other thing to think about with estate planning as well is in the US, we don't really think about it unless, you know, it's over 12 or $13 million for someone who's single, or 25, $26 million for a married couple. That's really not the case in France. I mean, everyone needs to think about estate planning in France. It should be kind of one of the key concerns when you have French assets. Just from our side, for financial planning purposes, just some key tips. Like I said, hire a French tax lawyer. France is a little bit different than the US, where in terms of in the US, you just kind of go find yourself a CPA. You can do that in France as well, but hiring a French tax lawyer that has a pretty solid understanding of the double taxation agreement can be really beneficial because just your average CPA that you might find in town might not have the experience of working with foreign clients. So hiring a tax lawyer that specifically works with foreign clients can be really beneficial. Another note, if you're going to move to France, just be aware of your bank and investment custodian's rules around having a French address. Not every US bank is going to be happy with you moving to another jurisdiction. The EU itself has very onerous rules around how banks and investment institutions can deal with you as a consumer. And that's led to a lot of banks like Wells Fargo, for example, just kind of pulling out of the expat or international market. They're just not happy to have your money, not happy to have your investments. A lot of investment custodians like Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard are also going to have their own in-house rules around how they will treat you as someone living abroad. We get asked all the time if people should move their pensions over to Europe. You know, can I transfer my IRA to France? Should I be moving my investment account to France? The answer to that is in almost every case, no. You should be keeping your savings in the US. There is no French equivalent of an IRA, of a Roth IRA. Those legally have to be domiciled in the US. If you try and move those to a different jurisdiction, it's just like taking a withdrawal from them and you have to pay income tax. For taxable accounts, you are much better off in terms of the double taxation agreement of keeping your money in the US, investing in US assets, and you also avoid any issues. I think the final piece is just when you move abroad, don't forget that you do have to file your US taxes. That it is mandatory. You need to file your US taxes, you're a US citizen, or if you're a green card holder. Unfortunately, that's just the name of the game for us, is that follows us around wherever we live. We have to file US taxes. You don't always have to pay them. There is that double taxation agreement, but you always do have to file. So our services, just to give you a little bit of color on that, we focus on holistic financial planning and investment management. So we help clients understand what it takes to move abroad. We specialize in helping Americans that live abroad and work through some of those custodial issues, work through some of the tax issues, work with their tax lawyers to understand what their tax obligation is going to be in their new jurisdiction. We are based in the US. We're a US registered investment advisor. We are a fiduciary fee-only advisor. And our specialty is we're really focused on helping Americans that are moving to Portugal, Spain, France, or Italy. Those are the places where we have a lot of experience, where we speak the languages, and we feel like we add a lot of value. If you want to get in touch, these are my contact details. So we always provide free initial consultations. If you guys have any questions, feel free to get in touch, and we're happy to accommodate them.
Great, thank you, Alex. Lots of really important things for people to think about there. Right, let's have a question for Alex. Let me just find them. Here we go. If I rent out my French property as a holiday home, do I need to pay French taxes and social security contributions?
Yes, so you do need to pay French taxes on a French holiday home. With property, the situation is that under the double taxation agreement, it's what's referred to as a situ asset. So it's physically in that location, and that is the jurisdiction that you owe taxes to. So there are special kind of tax considerations and regimes in France, depending on, you know, the type of rental property that you have, whether it's furnished, unfurnished, the type of tenant that you might have. So you can get some special deductions based on that. But yes, you are going to have to file a French tax return.
Okay. Right, let's have one more question from Alex. I'll just find one. Yeah, what is the situation for a remote worker in France regarding taxes? I assume this is somebody that's remote working from the US, but moving to France.
It is extremely complicated, and you're going to need to get some tax lawyers and your company involved. It's not incredibly straightforward because you need to consider whether, I mean, the biggest issue with this is not really ever around income taxes. It's around who you owe a social security contribution to and why, and whether you're on a local contract or not. So it actually involves a significant amount of legal work to kind of normalize that, which is not our area of expertise, but I have answered that question enough to know that.
Okay, great. And I think that's good advice for any tax questions in France, is really to make sure you're getting that correct advice. Okay, we'll stop there with the questions for now for Alex. But remember, if you do have any questions for him or for any of our other panelists, you can drop them in the Q&A box and we will come back to Alex again at the end. Right, let's go over to our third and final speaker now, which is Kelly Cutchin from Moneycorp. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Let me go ahead and get started here. Well, welcome everyone. As Zoe mentioned, my name is Kelly Cutchin. I am the country manager for Moneycorp, and I cover the territory of North America. Kind of my slogan over the years has been that I help people all over the world buy and sell real estate all over the world. So I'm excited to be here. I've been with Moneycorp 17 years now, so not since the beginning, but for quite some time. So I'm excited to see this shift in the market where there's so many Americans considering an investment in Europe, which is far different from things just 5, 10, 20 years ago. A bit about Moneycorp. We are a UK-based company. We started trading in the late 70s. So again, I haven't been here since the beginning, but been here a good chunk of time. Annually, we're trading approximately $90.7 billion in foreign currencies, and that's in over 120 different currency pairs. We do have teams all over the world. I'm here located in Orlando, Florida. So we can deal with customers that are, again, buying and selling real estate just about anywhere. And we're highly regulated. I say to folks all the time that there's probably few industries out there that are as regulated as the foreign currency exchange industry. So do feel confident that you're working with someone that is extremely regulated and extremely compliance driven. Just to show you a little graph of where we have some physical locations, but don't be alarmed if we don't have an office in your specific state or city or even country. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't assist you, but it is great to know that we do have strategic offices placed around the globe to be able to reach the local clients and to assist with those transactions. Do feel free to visit our website at some point at moneycorp.com. We do have some online tools and things that could be useful for you throughout this overseas property purchase journey, or if you're just looking to do some research. So there is some information on currency zones specifically, so more information about just currency markets in general, other blogs and posts and articles as well. So feel free to check that out at your convenience. You may also find overseas property guides. And again, knowledge is power here. Information is key. So just make sure that you're doing all of the research as early on in the buying process as possible. And today I'm obviously going to talk specifically about real estate, but do bear in mind that anytime you need to do an international transfer, a service like Moneycorp could be a good option for you. So whether you're looking to send funds to friends and family for various reasons, perhaps you're having a destination wedding, you're buying a yacht, or doing anything else that requires anything legal else that requires currency exchange and international transfers, a service like Moneycorp could be useful for you. So the obvious thought is often, all right, I need to make an international transfer. I need to put down a deposit. I'll contact my bank. That is the natural instinct that we all have. We know that when we think of money, we think of our banks. But unfortunately, the banks are not the expert when it comes to currency exchange nor international payments. Don't get me wrong, we obviously need our banks, we need checking accounts, savings accounts, debit cards, etc. But it's very uncommon that you'll speak to someone at a bank that has the expert knowledge as it relates to currency exchange. Actually, I'll tell you that a lot of times we have clients that contact their banks to ask about an exchange rate, and the bank teller often tells them, I think you're meaning to ask about the interest rate. Well, no, that's not the case. I'm specifically trying to ask about an exchange rate. And that just goes to show the lack of knowledge at the bank level as it relates to foreign transactions. If you were to do an international transfer through your bank, you would be subject to likely an international transfer fee. This is a small fee in the grand scheme of things, but nonetheless a fee that we can help you avoid. Those international wire fees typically range from anywhere between $25 and maybe $75. The next thing, though, is the most important. Banks charge high margins. There's something known as the interbank rate of exchange. So this is the exchange rate that big banks are buying and selling billions of dollars of currency at any moment in time. But that's not the exchange rate that you or I or anyone out there actually has access to. However, because Moneycorp is a big player in this currency exchange market, we do have access to that live rate of exchange. The margins that banks are taking can range, unfortunately, sometimes from 3% to even sometimes as high as 8 and even 10%. So this is the key component on making sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck, is shopping around to make sure that you're getting the real rate of exchange or as close to that real rate of exchange as possible. The other thing to consider is that banks aren't going to be proactive in providing you expert guidance. When you are ready to do a transaction, you phone up your bank on that day or go visit them in person on that day and do the transfer, and you just have to take the exchange rate that's available at that time. The good news is there's an alternative. So with Moneycorp, you will never pay an international transfer fee. We have bank accounts around the world so that our clients can transfer funds domestically into those client safe accounts. So if you're an American buying in France, you would transfer your US dollars into a client safe bank account in America. We'd facilitate that exchange, and then we can make those international payments on your behalf. If you live in Canada, same would go for you, et cetera, et cetera. The next thing, again, is the exchange rates, as I mentioned. When the banks are taking margins of 3, 4, 6, 8, 10%, Moneycorp typically is working on a less than 1% margin. So we are looking after your best interest and trying to get you really close to that real rate of exchange. Every customer that opens an account with us, which is free to do and places you under no obligation to use our services, is introduced to a dedicated foreign currency exchange expert. It is their job to build a relationship with you. They want to provide you with expert guidance. They can always provide you exact quotes, and they can even help you target a specific rate of exchange. But we want to make sure that you have all of the information that is going to be necessary for you to, again, get the best possible exchange rate within the time frame that you're working with, and that you're not leaving money on the table. And of course, we can provide you with online statements, and we're always a phone call away to answer any questions that you have throughout the process. Here's how the process works from start to finish. You set up an account, takes 3 to 5 minutes in itself. You'll then have those discussions with your currency dealer ongoing. Once you do agree an exchange rate between the US dollar and the euro in this instance, that is a verbally binding contract. You're locked into that rate of exchange, so you don't have to worry about it moving against you after you do that. You then would transfer your US dollars into that client safe account, and then again, ask Moneycorp to send those euros wherever they need to go. Bear in mind, all the euros don't have to go to the same place. If some euros need to go to a notaire, fantastic. If some need to go to an attorney or somewhere else, or to a company that you're purchasing furniture with, then fantastic. Moneycorp can make those payments on your behalf. Here's the fun part, because I feel like when we put some slides in front of you with some graphic images that can really paint the picture, it kind of all falls into place. So in this scenario here, we have Jane. Jane is from the United States, and she is buying a property in France. I prepared this slide just yesterday, so hot off the press. If Jane were to go to her bank yesterday, she would likely get an exchange rate of 1.11. So it would cost her $1.11 in the US to get €1. So a 300,000 euro property is going to cost her $333,000. Exact same moment in time, because she called Moneycorp simultaneously, we were able to get her an exchange rate of 1.08, which means that exact same property at that exchange rate would cost her $324,000. So a savings of around $9,000. So the cost savings here is substantial. This is often a difference in, covering closing costs, covering flights to and from several times, furniture packages, etc. So again, it is quite a substantial difference and really important that you shop around for that best rate of exchange. All right. I now want to just demonstrate how the fluctuation in the currency is really an important factor for you to consider as well. So we still have Jane, she's still buying that same house. And I just want to demonstrate that on November 28th, so just almost a month ago from now, the exchange rate was 1.10. So the property would have cost her $330,000. Had she been a bit more prepared, perhaps she could have been speaking to us about locking into the exchange rate back on the 1st of November, where the exchange rate was 1.05. And you can see that that meant that same property would have been $15,000 less for her because of the exchange rate. And if Jane was really organized, if she knew about this back in October, we could have gotten her a rate of 1.04. So the purpose of this is just to demonstrate it's never too soon to start discussing your intentions with us so that hopefully we can lock you into an exchange rate at the ideal moment for you. Moneycorp can lock into an exchange rate for up to 2 years. So if you're buying new construction, if you know this is something that you want to do, but you're not closing till the summertime, again, start talking to us about targeting a rate and then more specifically about locking into the rate if we feel like we get to that optimal exchange rate within your buying time frame. This is just a graph to show you this isn't going to stop. The exchange rates fluctuate constantly. They fluctuate over the year, the month, the week, but even the day. So this is something that you really need to be mindful of as you go through this process. Our services are also available online. So of course you have the currency dealer to always speak to, but if you're like, I got this, I can do it myself, then that's fine. You can do transactions through our website as well. People often ask me what impacts the exchange rate, and the easier question would be what doesn't impact the exchange rate, and the answer would be like what I'm having for dinner. But other than that, there's lots and lots of things that impact the exchange rate, and this is why we want to sort of decipher this information for you and provide you with comprehensive updates, because if you tried to go out there and understand the currency markets on your own without living and breathing this every day, it could certainly be overwhelming. I do want to leave you with my contact information. No question is too silly. As I mentioned, over 17 years, I've answered most questions over that course of time. So please don't hesitate to call me. That's my cell phone number there. That's my email address. Feel free to take a picture of it. The next slide I'll just show you real quickly. You can point your camera at it and you can actually set up an account with Moneycorp in minutes and then at least have a conversation directly with a currency exchange dealer. Again, if you need to do something instantly, we can help with that. But if you're looking or considering doing something over the course of the next couple of years, we would love to talk to you as well. So thank you so much and happy to field any questions that anyone might have, Zoe.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kelly. Right, we'll jump straight into a few questions for Kelly, and then we will open up the panel to everyone else again. Just before we do, there's a few people asking about contact information. Don't worry, we're recording this webinar. We'll send it out to everyone afterwards so you can play it back if you missed anything, and we'll also send out everybody's contact information. So don't worry if you missed those slides. Right, question for Kelly. Let me look. If I'm purchasing a property in France from a US owner, can we make the transaction in dollars instead and avoid exchanging into euros?
No, unfortunately not. So you will be faced with a currency exchange and international payment at some point. So you can't just find someone out there from America that's selling a house and then do that transaction here in the States. It does need to be a legal real estate transaction in France and therefore done in euros.
Okay, well, shame about that, but just
Good try.
okay. Yeah, exactly. Right. What's the most cost-efficient way to manage smaller transfers, for example, to pay taxes and bills on my French property?
So having an account with Moneycorp is similar to having a multi-currency bank account. So at any point, you can hold a balance in dollars, you can hold a balance in euros, sterling, Canadian dollars, you name it. So, one of the things that we come up with quite often are people that are in France or they plan to go to France to look for a property. But as the other guys mentioned, they are leaving their funds in US banks when they make these trips. And unfortunately, there's a good chance that you aren't going to be able to access those funds. So the United States Patriot Act states that you're unable to facilitate an international wire transfer without being physically present. So what we want to avoid is you going to France, finding the property of your dreams, needing to make an immediate, good faith kind of deposit, and then not being able to access your funds in your American bank until you return, which might be, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, or even more. And at which a time, of course, things can happen. Maybe that property is no longer available. So I would highly suggest speaking to your bank before you leave and finding out what sort of limitations you will be faced with, or pre-funding your Moneycorp account. That way, while you're on your travels, if you do need to access those funds, you can phone up your currency dealer and we can get that payment sent to you wherever you are. So that's the same whether you're buying a house or you're needing to pay bills, etc. It's not a bad idea to have some money on your Moneycorp account so that it's always accessible from wherever you are.
Okay, great advice. Okay, right. I'm going to start going through some of these live questions. We don't have too much time, but we'll try and race through as many as possible. Brad and Alex, do I still have you there? Just check everyone's still great. Okay, right. Let's look. This one's from Florence and it is for Brad. If you have French citizenship but live in the US, does that change anything in the buying process?
That's a good question. No, it shouldn't. I mean, in general, when you're purchasing a property in France, you have the same status regardless of your citizenship. The issue is provenance of funds. Obviously, if you're buying and you have funds in the United States, it would be the same process of bringing them back to France and transferring them to euros. As far as the inheritance is concerned, you're a French citizen, you're buying in France, so the same rules and regulations would apply to you. Clearly, visa requirements don't apply because you have a French citizenship. So no, I don't think there's any real difference as well. The one thing I will say, though, is if you do not declare the property as your primary residence, then upon selling the property, if you do actually make a profit, you are subject to capital gains taxes. And that's really important to remember because in the United States, there are limitations to that. There's a system in place. If you're single and you're filing that way, you have a certain amount of money that you don't have to pay capital gains once you've made a profit. If you're married filing jointly, that number is twice as much. And I think the numbers last I checked were about 250,000 and 500,000 worth of profit, single versus married filing jointly. In France, if it's your secondary residence, you have to pay capital gains on any profit, but regardless of the profit that you make, if this is your primary residence in France, you do not have to pay capital gains at all.
Okay.
If it's your primary residence, that's
Right.
important.
I wonder if Alex has anything he wanted to add to that as well. Are there any differences regarding citizenship? If you have French citizenship but it seems US residency, how does that change the situation regarding taxes?
No, I mean, Brad hit it spot on. It's
Okay.
more probably about what happens at the end.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, whilst I've got you, Alex, another one for you. Does French inheritance law recognize same-sex marriages? Are there any differences there?
Yeah, so in France, there's I don't know, depends on where the jurisdiction of the marriage, but in France there exists a concept of being paxé. So a civil union exists in France. Actually, I would say the majority of people get paxé instead of married. in general. It's probably the more common form of a legal partnership in France as it is. So that is recognized. Again, it's not the same system in terms of you can just give a spouse or a partner everything that you have. That can happen, but it depends on whether you're alive, whether it happens upon death. So it's a little bit of a different system than the US or from a common law perspective. So again, it's important when you're purchasing a property or gaining French assets to have full clarity of what that looks like going in. And typically that can mean engaging with a lawyer.
Okay, and I think there was another question on a similar thing. I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, an anonymous attendee said, does French recognize domestic partnerships vis-a-vis property purchases? So that's a similar thing. It's called a PACS in France. Is that correct? That you were just talking about.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
it's a civil partnership. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Right. Let's find one for Kelly. I think there were a few that just came in at the end. Okay. Margarita says, what's needed to lock in a rate up to 2 years? For example, if the rate dropped. So what would happen if the rate dropped during that period as well?
That's a great question. That was 2 questions in one, so I'll try to answer both. In order to lock into an exchange rate, which of course you wouldn't do until you feel like it's the optimal time to do so, or to, of course, protect you from potentially falling against your budget or losing money. But in order to lock into a rate, we would require a 10% deposit. That offsets the total amount that you're looking to transfer. So you can leave the other 90% of your US dollars in your interest-bearing accounts or tied up in other assets. Moneycorp would require a 10% deposit. You'd then transfer the other 90% on or before the date that you need the payment sent, and then we would be able to release those euros at that time. We wouldn't obviously suggest that you lock into the exchange rate just on a whim. We'd want to hopefully monitor the rate for you on your behalf in hopes that we are at the optimal time so that you can eliminate that risk of the rate moving against you. Unfortunately, once you lock into an exchange rate, you are locked in to that exchange rate. So you can't sort of lock it in and then go, oh, but the rate moved in my favor, let me lock it in again. The reason being is that when you lock in a rate with Moneycorp, we actually purchase the currency for you, and then we just hold it on your behalf. So that's the reason why we can't change the rate once you are locked in. But we wouldn't, again, speak to you about locking in unless we're 1, we feel like this is the best rate of exchange, or 2, you're working on a budget. And if we fall against that number, you're going to have to back out of your plans. So speak to a currency dealer and they can help you decide if it's the right time to lock in.
Okay, great. Right, we're right at time. I'm just going to ask one last question. I'm sorry we haven't got through them all today, but we will send these on to the panelists afterwards as well. This one is for Alex again. Deborah says, do you have to file 2 tax returns? I'm assuming she means one in the US and one in France.
Yeah. Yes, you do need to file 2 tax returns. That's unfortunately how it works. And often, not always in France, you can find one accountant that can do both, but often you need 2 different sets of accountants.
Okay, brilliant. Right. Well, thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to everyone who attended, and one more time to our panel for giving up their time and answering all your questions today. As I said before, if we didn't get around to your questions today, we will make sure that we forward them on to the relevant panelists. And if you have any additional questions or you want to get in touch with any of today's panelists, you can also email us at webinar@FrenchEntrée.com. If you enjoyed today's webinar, keep an eye out for more FrenchEntrée webinars over the coming months, and make sure to subscribe to our FrenchEntrée YouTube channel, where we publish weekly videos to help French property buyers and those looking to move to France. And finally, let us know what you thought of today's webinar. Did you enjoy it? And what topics you'd like to see us cover in upcoming webinars? That email again is webinar@FrenchEntrée.com. Thank you once again to everyone for attending, and one more time to our panel, and I'll hopefully see you all on the next webinar.